There were many famous people that were clients of the pawn shop that I worked at in Hollywood. Now, I worked in a pawn shop for a couple years in Hollywood on Melrose Boulevard. And, we had the typical clients, forgettable, people that needed a quick buck, people who maybe didn't speak English that well but had a lot of gold and would need a few bucks to buy some groceries or pay a light bill or something. But there were many people that were either on the come up of the music business or the come down, that were clients that would come in and pawn their instruments, pawn their gold or silver or whatever they had, their VCRs, their TVs. Now, we're talking about the time period where it was very frightening times in Hollywood. I mean, we're talking, this is like 88, 89. You got the AIDS crisis. You got crack. And then with the Guns N' Roses thing, bringing in the people who were going even further down the toilet, right? Now, I don't know any of these people personally that were clients of the pawn shop. But, people that have their stuff together generally aren't pawning everything they own. They're usually figuring out how to budget themselves and not having to do that unless they're just really poor with finances, and that could be the case as well. But I want to talk to you about a band that was not really never really blew up. It kind of came about at the tail end of the Sunset Strip scene, sort of right after Guns N' Roses. Now, when Guns N' Roses hit, labels were scurrying to find the next Guns N' Roses. That's what they do. They don't really do anything creative or, let's try this. Let's give these new guys, let's give somebody different a chance. No, they're looking for the next one. So Guns N' Roses, and then what? LA Guns, right? Because Tracy Guns had been in Guns N' Roses, kind of like Dave Mustaine had been in Metallica. So, he's adjacent to a very big band, so he gets a shot, just like LA Guns gets a shot. But there were, other bands that were trying to cop that formula, and some of them, like a band like Taz, who was a Sunset Strip band. His singer sounded a lot like Axl Rose. And Axl Rose had copied a band called Shark Island. But I digress. So there was a Hollywood band called Junkyard, right? And they kind of had that Guns N' Roses vibe a little bit. They were a little bit bluesier. They had a little bit of Southern flavor. I guess some of the members of the band had been from the South. And several of the guys, at least 3 that I know of, would come into the pawn shop that I worked at. Now, we're talking not at the end of their career. We're talking right in the thick of it. So, the bass player was a guy named Clay Jefferson. And Clay Jefferson was, he was a bass player, right? And he played in the band Junkyard. Now, Clay came into that pawn shop quite a bit. And he'd always seem a little sweaty, a little frazzled. He'd have his rock and roll attire. He'd have a cut-off shirt, like a jean shirt or whatever, cut off. And he'd have like black jeans, and he'd have a chain hanging off his belt, and he'd have his motorcycle boots on. And, he would come in the pawn shop quite frequently, as would the drummer, Pat Mazingo. And then the guitar player, who was a bigger guy, didn't have the quintessential Sunset Strip look, but he was probably the guy who wrote the songs in the band. I'm just guessing, right? But Clay Jefferson would come in quite often, right? And what would be shocking about it would be they had an endorsement with Carvin, right? So Carvin, he had secured a deal with Carvin, and he was in the band was signed, and so they're on their way. They're getting signed is not the be all end all, but it's a start. It's like starting out on your path, right? So he's got to deal with Carvin, and how do I know that? Because boom, he walks in the pawn shop with 2 brand new Carvin basses and pawns them, right? We're not like waiting till the label drops them, and no, he's literally like, these things look like they had just given it to him, like maybe a few months. And I remember one was like a beautiful, like, it had the pointy headstock, because that was the thing back at the time, and it was like a dark blue 4-string bass, right? And there's Clay. Oh, hey Clay, what's happening? And the guys, me and the guys that worked in the back and would take the stuff in, we were all long-haired rockers too. So we're like, hey man, man, this is a cool bass. Yeah. Well, I got to deal with Carvin, and but I'll get them out soon. I just need a couple $100. So, the pawn shop would generally give, like, for a decent instrument in a hard shell case, no matter what it was, it's like, that's $100 loan, and you would get 3 months to pay back the loan, or come in and pay the interest, which would accrue each month. And I think maybe it was like $13.75 plus a storage fee, because they would charge them for storing the instrument. So it'd be like $13 plus a $9 storage fee, and that would be each month. So they would have to come back in order to get that $100 loan back. You'd have to come back with, like $150, $160. I'm just kind of guessing off the top of my head, but it was not going to be easy to get that back after taking that $100. Yeah, you might need that $100 right now. You might feel like you need it, but do you really need it? I don't know. I don't know what they were doing in their personal time, but the band Junkyard, they just gave off the vibe like they were of that Guns N' Roses school. So, I mean, you do the math, right? So they would pawn, stuff. They would come in. And I think even one time, Clay brought in his girlfriend, and she was like she had been in Cherry magazine. She was one of those girls. She was quite well endowed. And he came in with her one time, I think, if I remember correctly. But, I'd often wondered, once I had, and those guys were coming in right about the time that I was starting out on the Strip. And I remember I was in the Los Angeles Times. A picture of me with my band was in Los Angeles Times, and Clay came in to pawn something, and they, my buddies at work goes, oh hey man, did you see this? And like kind of pointing at me. He goes, oh yeah, I saw that. But he was all about, I gotta get my money. Here's some more basses. And he might have had 4 different basses in there. So, I often wondered, I'd kind of followed them, seen like when their song came out on the radio, and they literally like got released at maybe around the same time of, say, Nirvana, pretty close to it, 92 or 91. And they were just not going to have a long career, the business was just not going to allow them that. The timing would not allow that. And, I don't know what went on with the band or how soon it happened, but many, many years later, I'm here, and I'm actually up in Nashville at the time, and I'm like, I wonder whatever happened to Clay Jefferson. I wonder whatever happened to that guy. Because I often wonder about people from the past, before the internet, before Facebook and all that. People would come and go in your life, and you'd never see them again, and you'd never have any idea whatever happened to that person. And so I looked up Clay Jefferson, Junkyard, and an excerpt from a book about some rehab-based softball team, and it had posted up, and it had it like a paragraph about Clay and how Clay had lived the rock star life, and he had done this and this. He played on this softball team that was all these ex-junkies and ex-rehab guys and all this kind of stuff. And the biggest shock was that shortly after Clay had left the band or been fired or whatever happened, he found himself bouncing around hotels and with a few ladies, and eventually he had to face reality, get clean, and get a job. And guess what he was doing? He was driving famous people around as a limo driver. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a limo driver. Heck, I was a bellman. I've been a security guard. I've done all these things. But to think that, man, he got that close. They were on MTV. They were signed, I think it was Geffen Records. He had an endorsement deal with Carvin. All things that I didn't have from my experience in LA. I never achieved any of those things. Didn't get the LA record, hair metal, rock band record deal. Didn't get endorsements with Carvin. He secured all of those things. But the lifestyle and everything just must have just chewed him up and spit him out. And all of a sudden, he finds himself in a black suit and a white shirt and a black hat. And he's driving celebrities around Nashville or picking people up at the airport or these high-dollar businessmen. All of a sudden, he's completely on the other side of the earth. So I was surprised a few years ago to see that Clay Jefferson had, gone to Hawaii, and I think, he had a kid. And, I feel like Clay probably, bettered his life and was trying to be, do better. And I think there's a history of that. And I think Clay was a good guy deep down in his heart. And unfortunately, Clay was involved in an automobile accident in Hawaii and died and left behind a son. And that is a great, great tragedy, because the guy had, he had charisma. He is obviously talented. Junkyard, they were one of those bands. They were a band that got a shot. They could have been huge. Maybe it was a timing thing. I don't know. But I feel bad for Clay. I feel bad that he left a child behind. And I hope that this memory, maybe point out some things and make his memory last a little bit longer. And, the guys in Junkyard, some of them may still be alive, and they may still play shows from time to time. But we're going to send this out to Clay Jefferson. I salute you, compadre, weekend warrior. Wherever you are, Clay, I wish you the best.